Although I've changed it somewhat, I first heard this story from Nancy Schimmel. Once upon a time, as most of these stories begin, long ago and far away, although you may decide as you hear the story that it's not as long ago nor as far away as one might think. There lived a king and queen and their 3 sons. The king was getting old and realized that the time would come when he could no longer perform the duties of a king. And so he and the queen called their sons to them to explain the situation and to give them a challenge. The king said to the 3 sons, "The time will come when I can no longer be a king, and I will give the kingdom to the first one among you who saves a woman from mortal danger." You see, he was a very traditional kind of king. And he said to the eldest, "Because you are the older, I will give you the first chance. You must go out and seek your fame and fortune and see if you can qualify to be the king." Well, the oldest son was excited. He was ready to go. He could hardly wait. He threw the saddle on his horse and took off almost immediately. And as he rode along, he left the meadow and turned into a wooded area. And as he proceeded into the woods, he met an old woman who had a fidgety nanny goat. And she said, "Oh, Prince." Now, she recognized him as a prince because of his dress and his horse, his princely raiment. She said, "Oh, Prince, I have this goat and I can no longer milk her. Would you milk the goat for me?" Well, the prince said, "I am a prince. I don't know anything about milking goats," and he just rode on. It wasn't too much later that he encountered a young woman with a crying baby. And the young woman said, "Oh, Prince, would you please feed my baby? I can no longer feed him." And he said, "Well, I'm a prince." And she said, "Well, he's hungry as a horse and he needs to be fed." He said, "Well, if it was a horse, I would know what to do with it. But I'm a prince and I don't know anything about such things." And he just simply rode off. Before he got out of the wooded area, he encountered an old man with a double-bit axe. And the old man said, "Prince, I am the woodcutter for the king. But I can no longer cut the wood. I need someone to help you. My house, you can live in my house. My tools are yours. Would you please take my job as the woodcutter to the king?" The prince said, "Well, I would serve your king, but not as a woodcutter." And so he rode on, rode into the castle, and pledged his allegiance to the king as a knight. Well, he was a good knight. He was very successful. He encountered many enemies. He slayed the dragons, but he never saved a woman, a princess, from mortal danger. Time went on, and the king decided that it was now time for the middle son to try his luck. And so he gave the same speech to his middle son. But before he left to go on his adventure, he thought to ask his father a question about being a king. And the king, his father, said, Well, there's more to being a king than just brave deeds. So with that in mind, he left. Now, as you might realize, he made the same trip, turned into the woods. He encountered the old woman with the fidgety goat and the young woman with the crying baby and the old man with the axe, the woodcutter. And he essentially gave them the same answers that his older brother had given them. Rode on to the castle, pledged his allegiance to the king, but not as a knight. He remembered what his father had said, that there's more to being a king than just fighting battles. And so he pledged himself to the king as a courtier and was very successful at it. He learned statecraft, he learned the social graces, he learned the politics of being a king, and he met many wonderful, fine ladies, but none of them were in danger of needed to be saved from anything more than a wolf, and most of them were quite capable of handling that themselves. And so time passed. The king called his youngest son and said, "It's time for you to seek your adventure." The youngest son, because he was the youngest probably, wasn't all that eager to leave home, but he knew this was what his duty was. And so he listened to the king, and he also decided to question the queen, his mother. And she said, "Remember this, always do what your heart leads you to." So with that he left, mounted his horse, rode a ways in the meadow, got off and looked at the flowers and the trees and gave a heavy sigh and got on his horse and started on his adventure. And he too took the same route that his two brothers had taken. When he encountered the old woman with the fidgety goat, and she said, "Prince, would you milk my goat? I no longer can milk her." He said, "Well, I'm a prince, and I don't know anything about milking goats. But I suppose if you would show me how to do it, I could help." And so with her help, he milked the goat. And he's standing there with this bucket brimful of warm, foamy milk. And the old woman said, "Because you have learned how to milk the goat, you can now have her." He said, "Wait a minute. Wait a minute. I don't need a goat. I don't want a goat. I'm on my way to seek my..." But he might as well have been talking to the wind. The old woman had disappeared. The young prince said, Well, he took one end of the rope that was attached to the goat, got on his horse, and rode thoughtfully on. He came to the young woman with the crying baby, and she said, "Oh, Prince, would you please feed my baby? I no longer can feed him." And he said, I don't know anything about feeding babies, but I do have this pail of goat milk, and I suppose if you could show me how to do it, I could help. And so the young woman helped him, and he gave the little baby the warm milk. And then the young woman said, now you have to burp him. And he said, "Burp? What's that?" And So she laid a linen napkin on his shoulder and showed him how to hold the baby. And by this time the baby had stopped crying, of course, and was gooing. And the young prince laid the baby on his shoulder and patted him until he burped. And the young woman said, "Now that you know how to care for him, you may have him." Wait a minute. I didn't ask for this. I don't know anything about taking care of a baby. All I know now is I've learned how to feed him. But he might as well have been talking to the wind. The young woman had disappeared. The young prince said, this story is not turning out like it is supposed to. But he put the baby under his arm, attached the end of the rope from the goat to his saddle, and rode on. It wasn't too much longer before he encountered the old man with the axe. He said, "I am the woodcutter for the king, and I no longer can swing the axe. My house, my tools are yours, if you would be the woodcutter for the king." This time the prince said, "This story really isn't turning out like it's supposed to be. I'm supposed to seek my fame and fortune and save a woman from mortal danger. But," he said, "I do have the goat and this baby, and I do need to know how to take care of them." And so he agreed. He settled in with the woodcutter, and they hit it off really very well and developed a relationship. And the woodcutter, the old man, would continue to take the wood into the castle. The young man found out that he really enjoyed being in the open air. And he remembered what his mother had said. Go where your heart leads you. He said, "Well, it won't be for long, but this is nice." And time passed. And the little baby grew into a little boy. And the young woodcutter would cut the wood, and the old man would take it into the castle. And they lived together very happily. And the young prince, now a woodcutter, watched the little boy grow. One day when the prince, now a woodcutter, was thinking about what he had set out to do, and was thinking how disappointed his father was that he had not done what he had been assigned to do. He was sitting there looking off into this middle distance when the little boy came into the hut, crawled up in the young woodcutter's lap. He said, "You want to hear something that's funny?" The young woodcutter said, "Yeah." He said, "You know the little girl that lives down the lane? Her mother has made her a red cape and a red hood. And all the other kids are calling her Little Red Riding Hood. Isn't that funny?" And the young prince, still not paying much attention, looking into that middle distance, said, "Yeah." And then he said to the little boy, picked him up and set him down and said, "You run along and play. I've got some thinking to do." And so he went outside, picked up the axe, and started walking down the lane. He looked back and saw the little boy and the old woodcutter playing knight and horsey. And as he turned the curve down the lane that leads from this story into another story that you know so well, a little bit of light caught his axe, and it's almost like it was winking at us. Long ago and far away, or maybe not.